You bought your Anvil Foundry, you've watched a ton of videos, either my videos or someone else's videos. You're ready to brew, but you still have some questions. In this video, I'm going to give you my answers to some of the most frequently asked questions. Now, for some of you veteran brewers on the Foundry, these frequently asked questions are not going to be anything new to you. But if you would, leave a comment down below with one of the things that maybe I don't cover in this video. I'm going to make a whole series of videos, but it'd be great if some of you veterans would leave a comment down below on some of the things that you didn't know or you found out after your first couple of times brewing. And if you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. We certainly do appreciate that. And it also lets YouTube know that you enjoyed the video, and it helps them spread it out there so more people can see it. Let's jump into the FAQs. So the most common problem of a leak on one of the Anvil Foundries is the ball valve not being tight enough. When Anvil ships the Foundry, they come with the ball valve basically just finger tight. And you're intended to tighten that up or take it out when you do your first cleaning or whatever, and then reinstall it and tighten it up. Now what I like to do for my system is I like to actually just do it basically hand tight. What I'll do is I'll use the ball valve on the outside, and I'll turn that as I hold the nut on the inside, and I'll tighten it up until I get a good amount of friction. You want to still be able to rotate the ball valve, but I tighten it up until it feels nice and snug, and that'll give you a good seal that won't leak. It is absolutely not recommended to boil with the lid on. The reason being, the Anvil Foundry does have a seal on the top lid, and it can create a lot of pressure, and there's one small hole where the recirculation tube goes through, and that pressure can build up and then spew out boiling hot wort and burn you. So definitely do not boil with the lid on. And one recommendation that I can make, and this is kind of one of those use at your own risk. I don't, Anvil certainly doesn't recommend it, but I'm just saying this myself. If you want to put the lid on until you reach near boiling, I think that you're okay to do that, but certainly don't clamp it down, and certainly stay there, pay attention, so that whenever it gets near boiling and the unit beeps, you're right there to pull the lid off and continue to boil from there, but do not boil with the lid on. The original Foundry had a ring system that was at the top of the kettle, and there were some feet that were actually on the outside of the malt pipe, and you lifted the malt pipe, twisted those, and they sat on those feet. Due to some build tolerances and some other issues that they had with those, they've since changed the design. So if you've bought your Anvil within the last year or so, you're definitely going to have the new catch system that's on the basket. And all that stuff comes in the Anvil Foundry. You just have to attach those legs to the basket. If you have an older unit, then they do make a kit for you to upgrade that and get rid of the ring. I do have a video, and I'll link it up here as well as in the description down below. Now, whether you recirculate or you don't recirculate, it is definitely a good idea to stir the mash. When you're mashing the grains, it is a tall, thin, or tall, narrow pipe. And so the grains can become compacted sometimes, or maybe the liquid is not flowing through the grains exactly, not saturating all the grains. So you definitely want to stir the mixture. And when you stir the mixture, you want to not disturb like the bottom 25% of the grain, because what happens is when you start your mash, the grain bed sets, it creates a filter, and you don't want to disturb that, because then you can start having a lot of particulate matter and that sort of thing in your beer or in your wort when you start to boil, which is not necessarily a huge problem, but it can make a mess in a fermenter and all that stuff. So if you can keep the trub down by doing that, one tip that I do have for that is take your mash paddle, whatever it might be. Here I'm showing the Anvil mash paddle. Take it, drop it in the bottom with it empty, raise it up till about a fourth of the way up. Mark that on there, just so as you're stirring, you know exactly where that point is, and you don't go any deeper than that. If you are recirculating, the best rate to recirculate is just barely enough so that you're keeping a little bit of liquid over top of the grain bed, and you might have to lift up the top recirculation screen to see this, but you don't want to have a ton of liquid on top of your grain in the malt pipe, because what that indicates is that you're draining the liquid out from underneath of the malt pipe, and then you could have some scorching issues and whatnot. I've seen that. So you definitely want to make sure that your flow rate is low enough that it's just maintaining an inch or so of liquid on top of your grain bed. And if you find that, you've stirred and you've done all that stuff, all the recommended procedures for the grain bed, and you're still having, kind of a stuck grain bed or a stuck sparge, you probably would want to look at your crush, or maybe adding some rice hulls to your grain so that you can increase the flow of your grain bed. Now, for me, the proper amount of power during the mash, whether you're recirculating or you're not recirculating, if you're using the system on 120 volts, I definitely recommend 100%. And then if you're using it on 240 volts, depending on how large of a mash you have, if you have a very large grain bill, I would probably recommend 80%. If you have a fairly small grain bill, then I would probably run it at about 50%. And that should give you the optimal results without too much oscillation of the temperature whenever you're recirculating. The number one cause that I know of for the temperature on the display not changing when you're chilling is the sensor sticks up out of the bottom of the kettle. And what happens is when you brew, you have, if you have hops in there, you have your trub in there from the hop break and all that. What happens is as you stir or recirculate or whatever, the trub will actually collect around the temperature sensor. And what it does is it insulates the temperature sensor, and so it remains hotter than the liquid that's in the kettle. So if you are experiencing, you've been chilling for a little while and you're not seeing the temperature drop, give the wort a good stir inside of the kettle. And chances are, once you break up all of that trub around that temperature sensor, you're certainly going to see the temperature start to drop. And then just keep an eye on it. If it doesn't drop from there, you might give it another stir again. But that is a way to have the temperature gauge or temperature reading show what's going on inside the kettle. Passivation is not 100% necessary. I do recommend doing a thorough cleaning when you first get it, either with PBW or oxy-free or some kind of a non-perfumed cleaner degreaser. There's a lot of different ones out there. PBW is one of the ones I use. Oxy-free would be another one that I would use. And, definitely clean. Now, if you do want to passivate, it's not a bad idea because it can remove any possibility of having some rust form on areas. What the passivation does is it kind of eats up some of the metals that might be left behind from the manufacturing process. I do have a video on how to passivate the Anvil Foundry, and I'll put a card up here for it, and I'll also leave a link down in the description so you can go check that out if you're interested in doing the passivation step. Yes, you can do small batches on the Anvil 10.5. What you are going to need is you're going to need the adapter that they have. Now, basically what the adapter does is it takes the 10.5 gallon grain basket and pretty much turns it into the 6.5. Now I'm showing the 6.5 and the 10.5 here side by side. As you notice, the 6.5 doesn't have any holes on the side when you get to the bottom. So the small batch adapter ring for the 10.5 actually goes into the basket on the inside. It basically covers all those holes and forces all of the wort to go through the grain through the bottom rather than exiting out the side. So if you have a small batch and your grain is not even reaching the top of those holes in the side of the malt pipe on the 10.5, you definitely want to have that ring to block off those holes to make sure you get good efficiency with your grain. Yes, you absolutely can use an extension cord. The recommendation that I have for an extension cord is that you don't exceed 50 feet and that you get a 12 gauge extension cord. Just due to the way electricity is, the farther you get away from the power source, the more the amperage and voltage can drop. And so in order to prevent a drop in amperage and voltage, or at least reduce it as much as possible, a 12-3 extension cord is certainly recommended. The other thing that is recommended, you definitely do not want to operate the unit without having it on a GFI, whether it's 120 volts or 240 volts. The 240 volt system is extremely nice. It works very well. I do have various videos making different cords so that you can adapt them to whatever your situation is. Again, I'll put a card up here. If you're interested in running your Anvil 10.5 or even your 6.5 on 240 volts and you don't want to cut off the cord. There's somewhat of a misconception around boiling wort and the recirculation pump. Really, the main reason why Anvil says not to pump boiling wort through the pump is because of cavitation. And what cavitation is basically whenever air gets into the pump head. Now, an impeller pump needs to be flooded completely in order to function correctly. I'm showing you an example of a clear tea kettle or boil kettle. so that you can see what happens whenever liquid is boiling in a vessel. And whether you knew it or not, underneath of all the wort down there, there's a lot of air bubbles that are coming off of the bottom of those heating elements. Now, one of the things that you have down there is your dip tube, and your dip tube is in very close proximity to those heating elements. So if you attempt to pump boiling wort through the pump head, then you're going to pick up some of those bubbles and you're going to have cavitation. My recommendation for sanitizing everything, if you're going to use the pump for transfer, and this is one of the things that I did miss in my first brew day video, and if you haven't seen that, I'll put a link up here, down at, up on the card up here and down in the description below. One of the things I recommend to sanitize your pump and lines if you're going to be doing a transfer with your pump, right after you shut off the brewing system and the wort is about 200 degrees, go ahead and recirculate some of the wort through the brewing pump and lines. And it's certainly not going to hurt anything, and it's going to sanitize everything for you so that whenever you're ready to transfer it to your chiller, you don't have to worry about any nasty stuff in your pump and lines, or any kind of, have to worry about any kind of infections from that stuff. And this recommendation also goes for the new stainless steel head that Anvil has just released. It doesn't increase the temperature or decrease the temperature at all for what the pump can handle. It just is a nice stainless steel head, and this recommendation is still the same. Don't put boiling wort through it because you can have some cavitation. Well, I feel like this video kind of just scratched the surface on the frequently asked questions that I've seen. I'll probably do a multi-part series on this. If you're interested in more frequently asked questions, be sure to leave me a comment down below. Let me know that you enjoyed the video and that you're interested in more of these frequently asked questions. Maybe even, give me some questions that you have that you would like me to answer in one of these videos. We certainly do appreciate all the support from everyone. Give us a thumbs up if you liked the video. Subscribe if you haven't already. And this has been Brian for Short Circuited Brewers, and we'll see you on the next video.